Simon Bolivar, Henry Clay, Francis Scott Key, Woodrow Wilson, and then there was Montpelier, USS Montpelier, and then there was USS Minneapolis St. Paul. So, yeah, it was a little bit more than 4. The last 2 were fast attack submarines. The first 4 were boomers. They were older boats where the keels were laid in the early to mid 60s. I was a senior chief radioman, so it was RMCS, and then parentheses SS and on parent. So yeah, I was a senior chief petty officer and a radioman. In my last command, I was what they call the senior enlisted, the chief of the boat. I've done everything from lead divisions to lead departments to lead the entire submarine. It's a very intense environment most of the time, especially if you're going on a spec op mission. You do some crazy things, so it takes a toll on you. In the boomers, you're constantly drilling, with alarms going off and different things like that. So as a radioman, for most of my career, I was responsible for maintaining communications, receive communications 100% of the time. And every time we would take an outage for over 30 seconds, it was recorded and sent to command of the submarine force. And we have to explain that at the end of the deployment with the captain and the XO and communicator and the navigator. We have to all go up to Norfolk, Virginia and sit there and get beat up. We're in a closed-in environment where we're breathing toxic chemicals 24 hours a day for 2.5 months. And I've done 14 of those deployments on boomers plus fast attacks. So and they're just now realizing we were exposed to over 130 toxic chemicals on board submarines during those missions. Now that I'm older and starting to get sick with cancer and stuff like that, I'm starting to realize that probably some of these things has caused us because the latency for asbestos is, anywhere from 10 to 40, 50 years. We did whatever we had to do. We don't get to call anybody for help. We have to fix anything that breaks. So yes, we did all kinds of repair work. Anything from repairing O2 generators, which produces our oxygen. I've got underway twice and been out to sea for 2 weeks burning candles without any pure O2 going into the atmosphere. We spent all night loading these candles down from the tender with a daisy chain with 150 people, load them into the submarine so that we could get underway, because the captain didn't want to miss his underway because that would make him look bad. Everybody knows about the surface craft something. The only time anybody asks something about submarines when they hear about a collision or, something like that, and it gets in the news. How often does that happen? Not very often. So nobody knows what we do to keep our nation safe. And honestly, we can't talk about a lot of it either. So that, that kind of weighs on your mind. Because when you sleep at night with your PTSD and you remember the things that you've had to deal with, for fires, flooding, all that kind of stuff, it just wakes you up and you break into a sweat and you have to go turn on the TV somewhere else and get your mind off of it, right? I've been diagnosed by a civilian psychiatrist, and they admit I have it, but they say that I can't prove that the service caused it. That's the way it is with the VA, You're always going to fight with them because they won't go the extra mile. There's those stresses as well because we don't get paid very much, and trying to raise 3 kids and support a wife on that's not working. It's a tight situation. My frustration is with the VA process, and even though they say it's getting better, everything we send up there as a submariner, generally it's just a rubber stamp denied. Even when I got a board certified oncologist that testified that it's more than likely that my 20 years of service and exposure to asbestos for months at a time over those 20 years was the primary cause of my cancer, prostate cancer. Since the VA doesn't recognize prostate cancer is caused by asbestos, they deny it. They say there's no medical proof, but there's studies out there that support that. And that's why the oncologist wrote that letter. The Navy pays these people to do these studies. I would love to ask them, who rode on board a submarine for 2.5 months and did a study on this? Just one. Anybody. But the answer is a bunch of crickets, right? My current application is under higher level review, and that can take up to 125 days. And that's as long as the initial expedited review took. It took them to deny me. I think the problem is training in them understanding and reading a nexus letter from a board certified oncologist that says that he agrees that this is more than likely caused by my service in submarines for both toxic exposure and asbestos. But, how can the VA ignore something like that? That physician's assistant, he's not even a doctor that makes that diagnosis or that opinion, right? He's not a board certified oncologist. He's not even a doctor. Nothing against those folks. They're very smart, most of them, Yeah. But anyway, it's like they admitted the exposure to both asbestos and ionizing radiation, but they said that it didn't cause any of my issues. Anyway, it's going to be looked at again, and if that's turned down, we'll just go to whatever the general board is, send it to the board and see what they got to say. We drilled all the time running back there for simulated fires because we have limited time to react to a fire. Literally, we've got minutes to get to it and put it out. Otherwise, we're going to be an extremist. So when people hear a fire called, they move in a hurry. And I've seen several fires that were real on board submarines, and that in itself can, provoke PTSD, because when you hear an alarm that smells like fire, or you smell fire, you run towards it, not away. So I was in a shipyard in Charleston Naval Shipyard, between 88 and 89, and I transferred in 1990 to the training center for shore duty. So I spent 2 years in a shipyard on the Woodrow Wilson in Charleston. And then I spent about a year and a half in Newport News Shipyard for a new 688 Montpelier. It was a 688I class fast attack submarine. There's been many times where people would get lightheaded, have trouble breathing because they had the O2 adjusted wrong, and we monitor the atmosphere, but it's not perfect. So, it is what it is. Once you figure something out, then you deal with it. It's just like when you walk through the environment you're in, you're aware of everything that's around there, makes you hypersensitive. So if your ears hear or your eyes see something that doesn't look right, you automatically have to go investigate. Just like today, if my wife leaves a cabinet door open, I walk behind her and shut it. And she goes, "Why are you doing that?" I said, "I'm sorry, it's a habit." And she thinks I'm crazy. It's just an automatic reflex. You can't make it go away. I got in contact with one of the guys that served with me on the Wilson, that was there during a flooding incident that the VA denied. He wrote a letter for me supporting that those statements were true and it did happen. But they can't find deck logs for it, so they say it didn't exist. It doesn't surprise me because, captains of those submarines make sure that kind of stuff is left out. They don't want that in there. They're the second most powerful person in this world because they're God underneath the water. It all has to do with their career and advancement. And everyone that works for them is scared of that, except for some old senior enlisteds like me. When I throw the bullshit flag when they do something wrong and say, "You're not going to do that," because what are they going to do? Kick me out the submarine in the middle of the ocean? They knew they needed me, and that's what they hated about it, because I pulled their ass out of the fire more than once. And, as a matter of fact, that same captain fired me at the end of the deployment, and I just told him thank you. He looked at me with a funny look. He goes, "I'm sorry, Senior Chief, what did you just say?" I said, "Thank you, sir." And I just turned around and walked off. And he had this puzzled look in his face. I knew he ruined my career, and I was going to have to retire, so he made that decision for me. But, those are the people that are college educated, really smart, nuclear trained, and everything has to be in a book in order to be true. And that's not always the case, especially when it comes to driving submarines and environmental conditions you're dealing with and an amount of experience. And, I had, kind of almost 14 years at sea. And multiple experiences driving submarines and taught half the Atlantic Fleet how to drive submarines in Charleston when I was in charge of the ship control trainers and emergency survival, and things like that. So they don't take into account that kind of experience they're losing when they force someone out like me. But I'm happy with it because you know what? My headaches are done. I don't have to worry about that crap anymore. My dad died 2 days before I deployed in my last submarine when I was the cob on there. I had to go back and bury him and fly back the next day to get underway. And, after that deployment, when I got relieved of my command as the chief of the boat, all I could think about is my dad rolling over in his grave if I didn't fight that issue, because they had no basis to fire me. They did no documentation, just the captain's word said I'm a piece of shit. So I fought it all the way up to the Secretary of the Navy. 2 weeks after I was out of the Navy, some captain called me up and says, well, we ruled that he didn't do anything wrong. I said, of course you did. Thanks for your time. Goodbye, Commander. Good luck. Good luck with the Underwater Canoe Club. So I left in a bitter state and didn't even have a retirement ceremony, but I just took me years to get over that. And, now that I'm talking to people about it, like my psychiatrist, because we were always told not to go talk to people like that because it's a sign of weakness. And that's the generation I was raised in. Submarine Advocacy Group. There's over 5,500, probably close to 6,000 submarine sailors registered on that. And they are fighting for recognition of submarine service that we've never gotten as an elite force in the military, and have to go into Congress and the Senate with studies that have been done and information that proves we're exposed to 130 different toxic chemicals. And I don't know how far they're going to get with that, but at least there's never been any other group that's tried to do that for just our people, is what I call them. The world of the Finns. Well, you can always ping the administrator and tell him who you are and who you work for. It just that you want some information on how many sailors that he's got there that have reported, because mostly all it talks about is helping veterans in what to do with the process or something like that, because a lot of these guys are confused even how to contact the VSO. And I'm like, oh, my God. I met a guy in a bar, and we got to talking about things, and he was an Army guy, and he said, here, Mike, I got a card for the VSO in Castle Rock, which is about 6 miles away from me. He says, you need to go talk to these guys. And that's how I got started with it. So it's just a hap chance. Otherwise I'd just been on my merry life until my life changed so drastically when I moved to Colorado and found out I had stage 4 cancer metastasized. So life is a little different. You just have to figure out how to go on with it and put one foot in front of the other.